Hello everybody, my name's Jane and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my February reading wrap up. So I'm pretty happy with my reading stats for the month of February. I ended up reading 18 books in total, with 5 of those books being novels and then the rest of them, so 13, being graphic novels. If anything, when I go through this list, I'm going to talk about my novels first, starting with the lowest ranking to the highest, and then I'll do the same with the graphic novels. So start at the lowest ranking, go back up to the highest. And I'm just going to jump right in. I'll give a quick synopsis of each of the books and then let you know why I liked or disliked them. So I'll just jump in. So February actually ended up being a super great reading month for me in terms of my novels, because out of the 5 that I read, the lowest star rating that I had was a 3-star rating, which doesn't happen very often for me, but I was so excited that I had such a good reading month. But the first book I'm going to talk about that's a 3-star rating is going to be The Free by Laura McLaughlin. I actually received a free copy of this for review from Penguin Random House, so thank you so much for sending this to me. It follows our main character, Isaac West, who is going to juvie for the first time after a carjacking gone wrong. He's only going to be there for 30 days, so he's not that worried about it. He's more so worried about getting back to his sister Janelle, as they're both in a really bad living situation at home. And it follows him in terms of why did he do the carjacking, what happens to him in juvie, that kind of thing. And I'll admit that this book was a little bit underwhelming. The beginning was really slow. It had some choppy bits that I didn't really like. Beginning into the middle, it really picks up the pace and you're really getting involved and invested in what happens to Isaac and Janelle. The characters are fine. I didn't really fall in love with any of them in particular. They were just kind of there. And none of the adults in this book are very supportive of Isaac, even if they think they're being supportive of him. None of them are that great, honestly. They're just kind of terrible. So I didn't really appreciate the adults in here. Otherwise, it was a good story. Again, slow going in, but it picks up at the end. But otherwise, it was a so-so book, but I still ended up enjoying it, which was great. So the next book I'm actually going to talk about today is going to be Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. I do a pre-teen book club of chapters. This was the pick for this month. I've mentioned it in other videos before, if some of you didn't know that. But this was the book for this month. Didn't like it as much as I expected. It was still good, and I can see why so many people like it, but there were some things I didn't like in this book very much. It's about a pig named Wilbur who is saved by a young girl named Fern from being killed, as he is the runt of the litter one spring. And he ends up getting into a situation where he may possibly be the next spring pig, meaning in the winter, he will be killed for food. So it's about a spider named Charlotte who makes Charlotte's Web and makes these messages in the web in order to try to save Wilbur and make him seem more special so that Fern's family doesn't kill him in the winter. I was more impressed by the movie than I was with the book, which is sad to say. One thing I didn't like in particular was that Fern could hear the animals talk in the book, which I just wasn't a big fan. To the adults, it made her seem crazy, and I didn't like that. But otherwise, it felt kind of like a letdown, and it was a little bit choppier than I expected with the language. So I ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Wasn't the biggest fan, but it was still good for what it was. Kids really enjoyed it, which was great. But otherwise, just reading it as an adult, I find I didn't appreciate it as much as I did when I was a kid. The next book I'm going to talk about today is also one that I received for free from a publishing company, but this one is an advanced copy, and I ended up receiving The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas from HarperCollins Canada. This book was fantastic, and all my qualms and complaints with this book are really nitpicky things, which is great. I'm so glad they're really nitpicky things. But this book actually follows our main character, Star, who is going home from a party at the beginning of the book with her friend Khalil, who she hasn't seen in a really long time. And on their way home, they end up being pulled over on the side of the road by the police, and Khalil ends up being shot and killed by the police officer at the end of this meetup. So the story follows Star in terms of her dealing with her grief and her survivor's guilt, but it also deals with her 2 prospective lives in the book, which she keeps kind of separate. There's the Star that's at home because she lives in a gang-banging type neighborhood, and then she also has a life at her school, which is an all-white school, and she's one of the only persons of color at her school. So she tries to keep those two parts of her separate, and then they end up converging at the end, which I thought was fantastic. But this is a real exploration of Star's growth and how she's trying to incorporate those different parts of herself into the world around her, and it was great. I love the dynamics in here, the relationships in terms of her friends, her family, the people that are involved after Khalil's death. It was so great, and I really love seeing all these relationships, and the fact that this book wasn't just focused on Star's grief and survivor's guilt, which I find that a lot of YA does when a friend dies. They just focus on the grief that the character has and nothing else about their lives or personalities. So I thought that was super great. It's a Black Lives Matter story, its own voices. It was really well done. It's a story that definitely needed to be told, and it is out on shelves now. If you guys are looking to pick it up, it was actually released at the end of February, so the 28th. So if you guys want to pick it up, I definitely suggest doing so. It was 4.5 stars. It was so lovely. It was so realistic, and the way it tackled this topic was fantastic, and I really appreciated it. So the next book I'm going to talk about today is actually going to be History Is All You Left Me by Adam Silvera, and I am so happy that I read this book. It's actually about a boy named Griffin who ends up going to the funeral of his boyfriend Theo because he died in a drowning accident, and then the story of Griffin and Theo's other ex-boyfriend Jackson and how they come to communicate with each other and have relations. And it was really sad. The only really complaint I had about it was that everything that's mentioned about the characters is in relation to Theo. Things that were being mentioned was always when, oh, Theo was doing this with me, or Theo really liked this about me, or that type of thing, which I didn't like very much. But otherwise, it was such a touching story, heartbreaking, so heartbreaking. The character development in this book was fantastic, and you really get to see a characters in a new light by the time you reach the end. In the beginning, you're more like wanting to like cradle them and comfort them in your arms, and you're like, I just want to protect you from this big bad world. But at the end, you're like, wow, there is a lot going on with these characters that we need to know about, and I loved it. A lot of contemporary that I'm reading, I don't find it's doing that for me, so I really appreciate that this one was able to do that. Everything that happened in here is very relatable. Like, the things that happened to the characters, I felt in myself, like I could really relate to them. And there's one specific scene in this book that actually made me cry. Like, I'm tearing up about it now just thinking about how I would feel if that happened to me. But it caught me, that scene caught me off guard, and I love that I actually ended up getting so invested in the story that it did catch me off guard. And I will admit, this is a sad LGBTQ story, but not for the reasons that you think it is. It's sad because somebody died, not sad because it's a coming out story and something bad happens to them as a result of coming out. That doesn't really happen in here. I ended up rating it 4 out of 5 stars. It was wonderful, and I really suggest you guys pick it up if you're interested. So the last book I'm going to end up talking about today is actually going to be The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This book was so lovely. It was a really refreshing take on a sci-fi story because I expected it to be this really like action-packed story of an adventure through space, and it wasn't. And I'm glad that it wasn't. It is about a crew on the ship called the Wayfarer that is traveling through space and the universe, and their job is to make these warp hole tunnel-like things all throughout space, all throughout the galaxies. And the story it told with the crew and getting to know them was amazing. It touches on politics, it touches on ethics, it touches on relationships, it touches on so many things in a really fantastic and unique way. I only gave it 4 out of 5 stars because it goes a bit slow. As you're getting to know these characters, it's so focused on character development that not a ton of stuff is happening. Like, there is, but there isn't at the same time. But other than that, it was lovely. It was a really good book, and I'm really glad I picked this one up. So are you guys ready for 13 graphic novels? Let's go. First one that I'm going to talk about is going to be Low by Rick Remender. I gave it 1 star. Was not impressed at all. The world building wasn't that good. Didn't like the art. Character development didn't really happen. The story was all over the place. And I just didn't appreciate it. I'm going to keep this one short and brief because I don't really like giving graphic novels 1 star. I'm sorry. Wasn't my cup of tea. If people like it, power to you. I'm glad that you appreciated it when I didn't, but wasn't a fan. Just didn't like it. The next graphic novel I'm going to talk about is going to be Trees by Warren Ellis. So what happens is there's these like tree type formation things that have landed on Earth, planted themselves in the ground. No one knows where they came from. No one knows what they do. They haven't done anything for 10 years. And in the graphic novel, it picks up 10 years later after these things have landed on Earth. I thought it was going to focus more on why these tree things were here. It didn't. It focused on some side characters in terms of there's like a mafia situation going on. There's another character who's trying to figure out his sexuality. There's another group that's researching the trees thing. And this is the only part that has to do with the trees because the trees are growing flowers out of them. I didn't appreciate that because I'm like, okay, why is this important? You find out why later and you don't really appreciate why the flowers are so significant. But I was expecting this like big thing to happen with the trees, or at least like better world building than what was offered. So I didn't like it, but I wanted more with the trees. I wanted to know why the trees were there. Doesn't really mention it. Something happens at the end with the flowers. I'm not going to say because spoilers, but I wasn't a fan. I gave it 2 stars. So yeah. The next one I'm going to mention is actually going to be Wayward by Jim Zub. It had a great cover. Very underwhelmed with the story though. It's basically about a girl whose name I don't remember who ends up moving to Japan, China, again I don't remember, and she gets there, and the minute she gets there a bunch of weird stuff starts happening like most superhero type graphic novels do, and she ends up figuring out that she has powers. Like special snowflake alert. She ends up meeting this group of kids that have powers as well, and you don't even know why the group's together. They're just like, oh, hey, you have special powers too. Let's figure out why all this weird stuff's going on. The art was beautiful though, which was so disappointing. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. Wasn't a big fan. I wish it had taken a bit more time to not rush things because it was super rushed and I just didn't appreciate what it offered, honestly. Okay, 3 down, 10 more to go. So the next one I'm going to talk about is a 3-star read, and that's going to be Anya's Ghost by Vera Broskal. This one is going to be about a girl named Anya who is actually a Russian going to an American school, and she ends up falling down this well type thing one day, and there's a skeleton in it, and she's afraid she's never going to get out of this well, but a ghost from the skeleton ends up coming up to help her. She ends up getting out of the well, and it's about how this ghost ends up following her around. I wish I was more impressed by this book, but the main character was just so mean. But I really appreciated the ghost because the ghost ended up getting terrifying as all hell. It was scary. The ending didn't wrap up things in a nice bow though, and the world building was kind of mediocre, and so was the story. And I was bored with the story because you're like, yep, that ghost is gonna be a baddie. She's gonna get her, and she did. The story was just very underwhelming. I didn't like Anya very much, so I only gave it 3 out of 5 stars. So moving on, the next graphic novel that I'm going to mention is actually going to be American Born Chinese by Luen Yang. I was confused. Just to put it plain and simple, I don't really want to explain the synopsis to you just because it's 3 different stories happening at once that all converge into the same story at the very end. One of them is about a Chinese boy who's going to an American school and is trying to figure out how to fit in, be with the in crowd there, and about him making new friends. I thought they were telling 3 different moral stories in one graphic novel. And the way that they converge at the end made me go, what? Like, not a good kind of what, as in what? That did not make any sense. That's just no. I expected more out of it and didn't get what I expected, so I only gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. So the last 3-star graphic novel that I'm going to talk about today is going to be Stitches by David Small. This one's a memoir, and I was underwhelmed by this memoir. It's basically about how he goes from being a sickly boy to a cancer patient. I was bored isn't the right word to use, but I wasn't as invested in the story or as engaged as I wanted to be, so I only gave it 3 out of 5 stars. So it looks like we're about halfway through them now, so let's talk about my 4 and 5-star reads in my graphic novels for the month. So the first one I'm going to talk about today is actually going to be Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. And I have talked about this in my books to get you through reading slumps for Top 5 Wednesday. So if you want to go check that out, I'll leave a card at the top of the screen so you can check that out. But Through the Woods is actually a collection of 5 short stories that end up following different creepy events, and they use creepy in different types of ways. They use it for the atmosphere, they use it in the situations that are happening, they use it for the art style to make things more or less grotesque. But it was really intriguing. I love the different stories that they told, and they each have their own art style, which I really appreciated, because I feel like if they were all the same art style, I might have gotten bored. And if you guys want a creepy graphic novel that'll actually creep you out, please go read this one. It was a blast to read. I'm so glad it was able to creep me out, and it did it in such a short amount of time. I just thought it was fantastic, so I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I'm going to talk about Saga Volume 6 by Brian Vaughan and Fiona Staples. I ended up getting to read the 6th one this month, which was great. I also mentioned this series in my Books to Get You Out of Reading Slumps video, so again, go check it out if you're interested. I'm not going to say what happened in this one because spoiler alert everywhere, but it was a good continuation on the story. There were some characters in this one that I'm like, I don't want to listen to these 2 characters talk. I don't care about them. I don't care about their stories. So that was the main reason I put it down 1 star. But again, the action was on point in this one. There were some different issues that were happening in this one that made you like get really anxious and worried for what's going to happen to the characters next. This one was on point aside from those 2 characters that I didn't care about. And I should probably mention that if I don't mention the number of which volume it is, assume it's the first one, and I'll make sure to improve upon that for my next wrap-up video. So the next one I'm going to mention is actually going to be Lazarus by Greg Rucka. This one was so interesting, and I can't wait to find out what happens in the next one. It's a dystopian future, and money rules everything. So if you want to have your family protected, you need to go under the protection of a family that has a lot of money. And each higher up family has a Lazarus. So it's a person who is genetically modified to be able to withstand a lot of damage, heal quickly, like that type of thing. And they're there to protect their family. And we follow one named Forever Carlisle, who is the Carlisle Lazarus. I love like the politics of the story and like the amounts of betrayal that are happening in the first volume. It really caught my attention. Otherwise, I would definitely recommend it, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So the final 4-star graphic novel that I'm going to talk about this month is going to be Bitch Planet by Kelly DeConnick. This one is about a patriarchal society where men rule, women are under their thumb, and what happens to a woman if they break the law, which are mainly revolved around protecting men. They go to Bitch Planet. They're sent there to serve out their time, and oftentimes they are sent to fight and kill each other on this planet because, you know, men need to be entertained. I was really upset that they weren't getting more justice, and the fact that it got me so upset really says a lot about the graphic novel, but it can get me that invested in just 1 volume. I really like the themes it touched upon in terms of what are certain laws that women can break in order to be sent to Bitch Planet, and touching on the corruptness of the society. It was interesting, and I just enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. So now I get to talk about my 5-star graphic novels for the month, and I am so excited to share them with you guys. But the first one I'm going to talk about is going to be Orange by Ichigo Takano. So the book follows our main character, Naho, who is going into 11th grade, and she has a group of friends, and in this group of friends, they have a new friend because he's just transferring into her class this year. She gets a letter from her future self saying, you need to protect this friend because in your near future, they are going to die. It was incredible. Loved the art, loved all the characters. They all balance each other out so well. I love the love triangle. It made me tear up and it got me really sad and emotional. I love everything that the manga offered, and this is the only manga that I read this month. I just hope that in the next volume it explains how these letters are getting to the past versions of these characters' selves. But other than that, I had no complaints. I didn't want it to end, and it had such an incredible impact. I'm really glad that I read it. So moving on to the second last book on my reading wrap-up, the next one I'm going to talk about is going to be Seconds by Brian O'Malley. And man, did this one do a good job. Mind you, the next two on this list are going to be chunkers. So if you don't want really long graphic novels, then I would avoid these two, but I would really suggest reading them anyway because they were so fantastic. This one follows our main character, Katie, who has dreams and inspirations to open up her own restaurant. And upon going through the motions of opening up this restaurant, she finds these magical mushrooms that can help her change the future. Love the art. The characters were so great and hilarious, and I loved them all, and their relationships were great. It was a really interesting take on time travel and how it can affect someone's future and the repercussions of doing so. Excuse me. But otherwise, I loved Katie and I loved her story, and I was getting so anxious for her after she started changing her future too much that it just blew my mind. I'm like, how am I getting so connected to you? But yeah, it was such a cool one, and I definitely suggest that you guys pick it up. So we're down to the last book of my wrap up, and out of all the books that I read this month, novels or graphic novels otherwise, this one is most definitely and absolutely my favorite out of all of them. But the one I'm going to talk about next is going to be The Sculptor by Scott McCloud, and holy crap, did this one blow me away and completely shatter all of my expectations for what I expected. It is about a man named David who is an artist struggling to get by, and he ends up making a deal with death so that he can sculpt anything he wants out of any material with just the touch of his hand. But the price of this gift is that he only has 200 days left to live. So David's going on and living his life. He's trying to work with these new powers. Things don't go as he expects them to. He ends up falling in love. It is such a heartbreaking story. It is so relatable. It is so incredible. I love the art, loved the characters, loved all the themes it touched on. The world building didn't really need a lot. And the way that David meets his love interest and gets to know her was amazing. It was a little bit of insta-love, but considering David's situation and the fact that he only has 200 days left to live, I was fine with it. The love interest doesn't fall immediately in love with him. So if it was both ways, I'd say yeah, not into it. But the fact that David instantly fell in love and his love interest didn't was incredible. I love that it took that approach and that it didn't just jump right in. It's like, yep, you guys are in love now just because the plot demands it. And it was fantastic. And the ending will tear you apart. It'll just wreck you all over. And this one, I actually cried as I was holding it in my arms. I'm like, no, it can't end yet. It can't. It did such a masterful job of telling this story of a man's struggle. I was so impressed. And I'm really thankful that I get the chance to read it and be able to rate it 5 stars and then recommend it to you guys because it was just such a good time. and I hope that some of you guys pick it up as well, because I feel like some of you would really enjoy it as much as I did. But yeah, that's the last book for my wrap up, and I'm really glad that that's the last one I got to talk about today. So that concludes my reading wrap up for the month of February. Again, 18 books in total, a little bit of mix and match of all the ratings I had, but I really hope that you guys enjoyed what I had to say. And if you ended up reading any of the books that I read, or if you have any recommendations for what I should read for the month of March, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave down in the comments below if you have any ideas for me, or if you have anything to say about what I had to say today. And yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!